look like a person who has secrets. You got the cars, the clothes, but you can't seem to look me in the eye.
Start by handing me your phone.
Uh, well, I'm not sure that I was trying to necessarily make a homage to Heat. And I think, listen, I loved that movie. I remember seeing it. I remember loving it. And I definitely wanted to make a movie that people would come back to the cinema for, that gave you the kind of experience that we all remember. Maybe, I'm older than you, but like I certainly remember having these amazing, memorable experiences in the cinema. I remember my dad taking me to see Heat. I remember seeing Collateral in New York, and yes, what I loved about Michael Mann's films was, he did a lot of research, and they felt like they were characters grounded in reality. Especially Thief, for example. I definitely wasn't trying to do a homage to that. I was trying to make a movie which had its own identity, that felt very contemporary, but also, I guess, harked back to some of those movies that I loved. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's a compliment if it makes you think of, the Michael Mann stuff, but I wasn't trying to emulate that. And I think if people do, they're probably gonna fall short. So I just wanted to do something that had its own kind of distinct identity, I guess.
Yeah. I always just kept thinking about Heat because, like, when you see Mike Davis's room is similar to like Val Kilmer's house in the movie, where it's like a beach house. But no, I mean, it felt like its own thing, which was
Yeah, that was all in the short story. The fact that the guy lives on the beach.
Yeah.
That was all in Don Winslow's short story, which I adapted. Yeah. Yeah, I think, especially if you got Chris Hemsworth, that comes with, all of the baggage of all of the brilliant kind of superhero and action stuff that he's done. And I definitely felt like I wanted a different version of anything that we've seen Chris do before. I knew that he had acting abilities that I don't think anyone has ever really seen. And so the way we really came at that was by doing a huge amount of research, digging into the research of the real people who do that job for a living. Yeah, so all of the backstory and all of the kind of, I guess, the layers that go into building those characters are based on research that I did speaking to real Jewel Thieves who are now in prison. And the same backgrounds would keep coming up. Many of them had been in foster families and foster care. Many of them had very broken homes. There was violence. There was, all kinds of domestic unrest. So lots of that became part of the backstory. And when we rehearsed, if you look at what Chris does in the movie, it's very different. His body language is different. His voice is different. It's a very different kind of performance where he's not just the kind of, I guess, stereotypical action hero. He's a guy who has much more going on. My background is in documentary, so, I guess if I'm going to write something, even if it's fiction, I'm going to try to base those characters as much in reality as I can. And, I have a documentary company, and so we have researchers, and, if you have a character like, for example, Nick Nolte's character plays a fence, you can find them. They are out there. They're people who have started off as legit businessmen. They've gotten themselves into slightly, some black market activity, and then found that maybe they made more money doing that than they were making in their legitimate jewel businesses, and they do more and more of that. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. I spoke to high-end jewelers in Beverly Hills, and some of the stories that they told me about being robbed at gunpoint were kind of almost more outrageous than the stuff that I was coming up with from my imagination. So you'd be surprised. Stuff that you think only happens in the movies it doesn't. It actually happens in real life too. I mean, I'm happy to hear you say that. I think you keep the propulsion throughout. I think you have to try to dispense with anything that feels surplus to requirements. It's sort of like a piece of music, you know. You want moments where it moves really fast and it's really exciting. You want moments where you slow the pace so that the audience has time to feel emotionally connected to the characters, and then and then you're like off to the races again. So it's very much baked into the process of writing it. But then also when you get into the edit, you know, you need a killer soundtrack. You need incredible sound design. It's just it's a rhythmic thing that you start to feel. And, you know, you can tell when you do it, when you test it with an audience, if they start, you know, like scratching their chins or like, you know, you can sort of feel where people's attention is flagging. And so then you'll make a note of that. You go back into the edit, you change the pace of that. And then now when we're playing it with audiences, they seem to be completely captivated from start to finish. So that's what you want. I would say it was nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I went from docs to a kind of docudrama type thing. I never really call it docudrama, but I think that's what people would describe The Imposter as. And then with American Animals, I kind of felt like I wanted to explore a whole other way of making a true story that was 90% drama, narrative, but with these documentary elements that would really pull you in. With this, it was a whole new, incredibly exciting but very scary world because it was such a big undertaking. But I think if you're feeling nervous about something, you can use that fear to do a lot of homework, you know, to make you do an extra level of preparation so that when you get there, you're really well prepared and you've got a very good plan. And I think if you've got a very good plan and you've storyboarded and shot listed, you're kind of more creatively free. If someone shows up, like one of these brilliant actors shows up with a better idea, you're not panicking. So you're like, yes, that's a great thing. Let's do that instead. So that's kind of how I felt. I felt like I did a crazy amount of homework in order to feel confident on the day. So that would be my advice, I guess. Yeah, look, there are so many benefits. And I think maybe we have slightly forgotten how much our enjoyment of a movie is so vastly increased by sitting in that room with all of those strangers and having a communal experience. But also, it's just big. You know, we prepped, devised, shot listed, storyboarded, and planned this whole movie for the big screen. So I think even the sound design, everything, your emotional experience is going to be bigger if you're watching it in a theater. And I think maybe because people have got big TVs now and they've got great home cinemas and all the rest of it, they think it's pretty close. And I promise you, it is very different when you see this, you know, and you get that full immersive experience. So and also the other thing I would say is, when you start making a movie, you know it's for the cinema. Everyone, from me to the cinematographer, to the crew, to the actors, they bring their A game.